Officer Derek Sullivan's reinforced boots executed a hostile intrusion onto the pristine sidewalk perimeter of Brookhaven's widest, high-value enclave. He intercepted the visual data of the black man in an expensive, high-cost suit, and his face twisted with visceral, toxic disgust. "What operational procedure do you calculate you are executing here, boy?" Sullivan's voice penetrated the morning silence like a lash. The man executed rotation. "Officer, I terminate vocal transmission." Sullivan immediately executed a physical constraint protocol on the man's wrist, twisting the joint to audit his wrist asset. "Is this Rolex stolen? Are you executing a criminal breach of these residences?" He executed a forceful physical displacement of the man backward. "Execute rotation. Hands behind your back. Immediately." "Officer, please." Sullivan slammed him against a luxury vehicle, the metallic thud resonating down the residential street. "I said, execute rotation, you piece of subordinate matter. You are unauthorized for this location." The man's expensive suit achieved wrinkle status against the vehicle's hood, his calm vocal transmission barely containing controlled rage. "I reside in this structure." Sullivan executed a harsh, cruel laugh. "Affirmative, and I am the president of this sovereign nation. Execute the final insult." Have you ever witnessed such raw, systemic, humiliating hatred directed at an asset simply for executing existence? 9:47 hours, 13 minutes until the critical operational deadline. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching and what time it is there right now. Prove you're monitoring this critical situation. Terrence Washington registered the cold metal of his BMW's hood against his chest. 23 years of federal service, and he was being treated like a common criminal asset on his own secure property. "Transmit identification immediately." Sullivan's breath transmitted the scent of stale, low-cost consumables and visceral contempt. Terrence slowly executed retrieval protocol for his wallet, his movements deliberate and controlled. Any sudden gesture could escalate this situation to terminal status. His fingers located the leather billfold, Italian crafted, a gift from his wife, Kesha, after his last promotion. Sullivan executed immediate seizure, flipping through contents like he was searching for contraband. "Terrence Washington," he read mockingly. "What kind of fabricated designation is that?" "It's my designated identity, officer." Sullivan held up the Federal Credit Union Platinum card, auditing it with tactical suspicion. "Where did you execute seizure of this asset? This is government-issued." Across the street, Mrs. Carter's live stream was achieving viral metrics. Notification sounds pinged from her phone as the viewer count executed vertical ascent. She whispered into the camera, "This is an absolute systemic disgust. He resides here. I have monitored his presence every morning for 3 years." The comments section detonated. "Initiate communication with the FBI. This is 2025, not 1955. Execute total financial liability against them." But darker vocal transmissions emerged from anonymous accounts. "He transmits suspicion. He is likely executing reconnaissance on the neighborhood. These subordinate assets are unauthorized for this location." Sullivan's radio crackled. "Unit 47 requesting backup on Maple Drive." "Copy that, 47. Unit 23 en route." Terrence's phone buzzed an alert. The caller ID read, "Director Jensen, FBI." He terminated the connection, auditing his Omega semester. The Federal Credit Union card wasn't the only asset Sullivan had missed. The small eagle insignia on his lapel, barely visible unless you possessed the knowledge of what to search for, caught the morning sunlight. "Do you possess a permit for this neighborhood, boy?" Sullivan executed a violent return of the wallet. "Affluent assets around here transfer high value to keep your type excluded." "Officer Sullivan." Terrence read the name plate with deliberate clarity. "I am now transmitting the order for you to execute physical withdrawal." "You will transmit orders to me." Sullivan's hand executed movement toward his taser. "You are now executing command protocol." The sound of another patrol car executing approach made Terrence's jaw tighten. This was escalating exactly as his civil rights training had predicted its terminal status. Multiple officers, residential setting, 0 immediate witnesses except social media. Officer Janet Mills executed egress from the second cruiser, immediately sizing up the threat matrix. Sullivan executed a rapid wave toward her with obvious relief. I have secured a suspicious individual here. Claims he resides in the Morrison house. Mills looked at the imposing colonial structure behind them, easily worth $2 million. Then back at Terrence, her expression transmitted total prejudice. Do you possess any documentation confirming resident status? Mills asked, her tone more professional but equally skeptical. Terrence executed slow retrieval protocol into his jacket pocket. Both officers achieved maximum tension, hands executing movement toward weapons. He produced a set of keys, the BMW's distinctive fob prominent among them. House keys, car keys, mailbox key. Sullivan executed immediate seizure, auditing each one. Could have duplicated the assets, could have stolen the vehicle. Mrs. Carter's voice penetrated the street perimeter. Officers, he has resided here for 3 years. His identity is listed on the mailbox. Ma'am, execute physical withdrawal from the operational area, Mills called out. We are currently conducting an investigation. Investigation into what? Mrs. Carter shot back, maintaining recording protocol. A man standing on his own driveway. 9:52 hours, 8 minutes remaining. Terrence's phone buzzed an alert again. Same caller, same decline, but this time he authorized the faintest smile. Sullivan was too focused on the keys to register the signal. What is the source of amusement, boy? Sullivan's voice was escalating, more aggressively charged. You calculate this as some form of humor. Negative, officer. I calculate this is exactly what I anticipated. The comment impacted Sullivan negatively. Anticipated? Are you transmitting that you engineered this situation? More neighbors were executing egress. The Hendersons from next door, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Patterson walked her poodle, stopping to stare. The Wilson twins on their morning jog, slowing to monitor. Some transmitted concern, others transmitted satisfaction, as if they had been monitoring for this exact moment. Corinne Mitchell executed ingress from her corner house, her HOA coordinator status marker prominent on her jogging outfit. She had been the single asset who had never authorized acceptance of Terrence into the neighborhood. Officers, Corinne approached with overt, unauthorized authority. We have registered several criminal breaches lately. Superior security is mandated. Mills nodded appreciatively. Affirmative. The community registers concern about security. I have resided here since 2022, Terrence said quietly. I've never secured acquaintance with any HOA coordinator. Because you are unauthorized for this location, Corinne replied coldly. This neighborhood operates under specific standards. The live stream was achieving critical viral status now. 2,847 viewers and climbing. Local news outlets were initiating signal pickup. Dana Williams from Channel 7 was already executing approach trajectory. Mrs. Carter had transmitted the communication link directly. Hashtags began trending. Brookhaven racial profiling justice for Terrence. But Terrence wasn't monitoring social media. He was monitoring his Omega, counting down the operational cycle. The small encrypted message indicator blinked once, twice. His federal contact was achieving maximum impatience. You know what? Sullivan stepped closer, violating personal space. I calculate we need to execute transit downtown. Authorize detectives to sort this out. On what charge? Trespassing, public disturbance, failure to comply with lawful orders. Terrence looked directly into Sullivan's eyes. Officer, I strongly recommend you execute delay protocol. Delay protocol for what, smart guy? You will monitor the result. 9:56 hours, 4 minutes remaining. The handcuffs clicked into place. The steel constraint executed penetration into Terrence's wrists as Sullivan forced him against the patrol car. The expensive fabric of his suit jacket scraped against rough metal, but his expression remained unnervingly calm. You have the right to remain silent, Sullivan began, his voice transmitting satisfaction. Officer Sullivan. Terrence's voice cut through the Miranda transmission. Badge number 4471. I transmit the command for you to register that number. Sullivan paused mid-sentence. What data did you transmit? Your badge number, 4471. I transmit the command for you to register it. Something in Terrence's tone fractured Sullivan's confidence for just a moment. Then anger flared. You are transmitting a threat, boy. I am simply transmitting the command for you to register your badge number. 9:58 hours. 2 minutes remaining. Third patrol car executed approach with Sergeant Rodriguez behind the wheel. His 15 years of experience was visible in the way he immediately assessed the scene. Handcuffed black man, 2 officers, growing crowd, phones recording everywhere. What is the operational status? Rodriguez approached with cautious authority. Trespassing suspect, Mills reported. Claims he resides in the Morrison house. Rodriguez looked at the imposing colonial, then at Terrence's obviously expensive attire. Anomalous data. Any ID? Sullivan held up the wallet, says Terrence Washington, likely fabricated, the Federal Credit Union card too. Rodriguez audited it more closely than Sullivan had. These are difficult to execute counterfeit on. Likely stolen, Karen Mitchell interjected, stepping closer. I am the HOA coordinator. I register all authorized assets here. Mrs. Carter's live stream had detonated. The viewer count hit 8,000 and was executing exponential ascent. Local news vans were already dispatched. Rodriguez studied Terrence more carefully. The man's composure was anomalous. Not the nervous energy of someone caught in wrongdoing, not the anger of someone falsely accused. Something else entirely. Mr. Washington, can you provide certified proof of residence? The keys your officer confiscated open my front door, my vehicle, and my mailbox, Terrence replied evenly. Mrs. Carter across the street can verify I have resided here for 3 years. Keys can be duplicated, Sullivan insisted. Vehicles can be stolen. Rodriguez wasn't convinced, but the crowd was growing larger. Look, Rodriguez said, attempting to de-escalate. Let's just execute verification of the residence. Sullivan stepped forward aggressively. I am terminating gameplay with this asset. He's trespassing. He's been uncooperative and now he's transmitting threats. What threats? Rodriguez asked. Transmitted the command for me to register my badge number. That is intimidation. Terrence's phone sounded an alert again the third time. Director Jensen, FBI, glowed on the screen for everyone to monitor. Sullivan executed immediate seizure. Drug dealer calling. Your parole officer, perhaps. He answered mockingly. Hello, this is Officer Sullivan. Your subordinate asset Terrence is under arrest. The voice on the other end was sharp, authoritative. Excuse me, I said your asset is under arrest. You require bail. Initiate communication with the station. Officer, this is FBI Director Jensen. I transmit the order for immediate communication with Agent Washington. Sullivan's grin achieved structural failure. FBI, affirmative, and I am the president. Rodriguez stepped closer, code red alarms initiating. Sullivan, terminate the communication. But Sullivan was committed now. Monitor this, whoever you are. This is a local police matter. Your friend is executing transit downtown. Agent Washington is a federal officer. I am transmitting the order for you to release him immediately. Sullivan laughed harshly. This asset, he is a criminal. The line achieved terminal cessation. 9:59 hours, 1 minute remaining. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez stared at Sullivan, whose face had gone pale. Mills looked between her partners, suddenly uncertain. What if that data was legitimate? Mills whispered. It was not, Sullivan insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. It's some form of engineered setup. Mrs. Carter's live stream had reached 15,000 viewers. News vans were now visible on the horizon. Terrence remained perfectly still against the patrol car, but his eyes found his watch. The small display showed an encrypted message, Federal response authorized. Officers, Terrence spoke quietly, but his voice carried an unmistakable federal authority. I am transmitting one final opportunity for you to de-escalate this situation. Shut up, Sullivan snapped, but the confidence was permanently gone. The sudden, chaotic transmission of the FBI director's call and the subsequent terminal cessation of the line left Officer Sullivan suspended in a state of absolute structural confusion. Rodriguez stared at Sullivan, whose face had gone pale, attempting to process the impossible claim. FBI. Mills whispered, what if that data was legitimate? Sullivan insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. It was not. It is an engineered setup. Across the street, Mrs. Carter's live stream viewer count was executing exponential ascent, and news vans were visible on the horizon. Terrence Washington, still physically restrained against his own vehicle, registered the coded message on his watch. Federal response authorized. His quiet composure was not passive. It was the unyielding stillness of a strategic asset monitoring the full collapse of the local power structure. The moment had arrived to deploy the backstory and authority asset. Terrence Washington was no ordinary citizen. He was a Tier 1 federal operative who had spent 23 years of his life executing service within the highest levels of law enforcement. His background was not one of accidental wealth or mere professional success. It was a systematic structural response to the very prejudice he was currently enduring. His relocation to Brookhaven was not a residential move. It was a tactical operational deployment. Terrence's professional credentials were the irrefutable counter-evidence to Sullivan's toxic assumptions. The Federal Credit Union Platinum Card was a minor asset. The true authority was his role as Assistant Director for the Civil Rights Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His expertise was the rigorous application of federal statutes to combat systemic bias, skills honed through 2 decades of high-stakes, internal investigations. His expensive suit and luxury vehicle were not markers of stolen wealth. They were the non-negotiable uniform of his rank and the visual camouflage necessary for his current operational objective. His wife, Dr. Kesha Washington, was not just a spouse. She was a community activist and researcher whose work often intersected with his own, providing unassailable academic and ethical layering to his federal mandate. The core of his mission was code-named Operation Mirror. For the past 18 months, Terrence had been documenting bias patterns across 47 police departments nationwide. His expertise in civil rights training and statistical analysis had isolated the structural failings in jurisdictions where racial disparities were statistically high. Brookhaven Police Department had been selected based on its high complaint ratio and adverse demographic data. Terrence had not stumbled upon this encounter. He had engineered the environment to maximize the probability of this exact, discriminatory response. His purchase of the home in 2022, securing the $2 million colonial structure, and paying $47,000 annually in property taxes, the undeniable financial superiority metric, was the final step in the deployment. He moved to the heart of the community to become a living, breathing audit of their systemic failures. This background established the core stakes. Terrence's current humiliation was not a personal injustice, but a critical, final piece of evidence required for a major federal intervention. His disciplined composure was rooted in his extensive training, which dictated that emotional reaction would compromise the operational objective. He allowed the aggression, the racial slurs, and the unlawful detention to occur, precisely documenting each violation for the federal case file. The brief moment of anger he transmitted was immediately suppressed, necessary only to confirm Sullivan's hostile intent for the record. The local police assets remained oblivious to the magnitude of the threat they had activated. Sergeant Rodriguez, arriving at the scene, registered the obvious anomalous data, the expensive suit, the federal credit card, and Terrence's uncharacteristic calm. But his 15 years of experience dictated adherence to the flawed protocol initiated by Sullivan. The failure to recognize the federal asset was a consequence of their own structural prejudice. Karen Mitchell, the HOA coordinator, represented the local, entitled power structure, her insistence on exclusion protocol serving as the final, visible confirmation of the neighborhood's systemic bias for the live stream audience. She was an unwitting accomplice in the federal investigation. Terrence's decision to decline the FBI director's calls was a calculated display of power. He did not require a warning. He required the unambiguous public documentation of the local department's willingness to escalate the assault despite evidence, the Federal Credit Union card, and common sense. He allowed Sullivan to grab the phone, allowing the local officer to commit the terminal error of challenging the highest authority in federal law enforcement. The final ticking down to 10:00 a.m. was not merely a narrative device. It was the operational countdown to the full deployment of the Federal Response Protocol, a moment Terrence had meticulously planned for months. His hidden expertise was now fully primed to achieve community validation through the systematic dismantling of the corruption. The moment Sullivan's laughter died in his throat, replaced by a cold, sickening dread, the narrative pivoted from a local incident to a federal structural audit. The tension on Maple Drive was not merely the result of a single racist officer. It was the systemic manifestation of a corrupted power structure that had been operating with impunity for years. Terrence Washington's operational objective demanded that he allow Sullivan and his subordinates to expose the full depth of this contamination. The Brookhaven Police Department was not a rogue unit. It was a symptom of institutional rot shielded by local politics and an entitled, discriminatory neighborhood elite. Officer Derek Sullivan, badge number 4471, was the perfect crystallization of this corruption. Terrence's pre-operation intelligence dossier revealed a profile not of accidental bias, but of calculated, repeat offenses, a pattern of behavior so destructive it should have resulted in immediate termination. Over his 12 years of service, Sullivan had accumulated 17 formal complaints, with an astonishing 89% of those involving people of color. Each complaint, a documented act of abuse, had been intentionally buried, dismissed, or settled out of court using taxpayer funds. This was the political shielding in action. The police union, the compliant Chief Morrison, and the silent, satisfied residents of Brookhaven who transferred high value and property taxes specifically to keep your kind out. This power structure had created a zero accountability zone for officers like Sullivan, allowing them to execute hostile intrusions into the lives of black citizens with total, unwavering confidence in their protected status. The most insidious layer of the local corruption was embodied by Karen Mitchell, the HOA coordinator. She was the unauthorized civilian authority who enforced the neighborhood's exclusion protocol. Terrence's files confirmed that Karen, an asset of significant age, mid-50s, possessed an unshakable, arrogant conviction that her position granted her the right to dictate which human beings were authorized for existence on her streets. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a micro-administrator of systemic racism, using the subtle weapon of community standards to initiate targeted harassment. Her immediate arrival, brandishing her HOA status marker, and fueling the officer's prejudice with false intelligence about several criminal breaches, was the final, required validation of the local institutional contamination for the federal record. She believed she was securing her property values. She was, in fact, executing the final, fatal error that triggered the federal response. This history of corruption directly led to the past victim harassment Terrence had documented. His team's statistical analysis had revealed that black motorists were 3.7 times more likely to be searched during routine traffic stops in Brookhaven, despite a 42% lower rate of contraband discovery, a clear technical indicator of stops based on racial profiling rather than legitimate suspicion. The local power structure had created a continuous cycle of targeted surveillance and humiliation that was rarely witnessed and never recorded with the necessary legal precision. Terrence Washington's deployment, Operation Mirror, was designed to break this cycle by infiltrating the power structure at the property ownership level and generating a live, irrefutable audiovisual record of a civil rights violation on his own land. As Sullivan continued his unauthorized interrogation, unaware that his past failures were already cross-referenced in Terrence's federal database, The evidence buildup was reaching its climax. Every word Sullivan transmitted, every microaggression, every attempt to intimidate, was meticulously time-stamped and confirmed by Mrs. Carter's live stream. The officers' collective failure to recognize the true threat matrix, the Federal Credit Union card, the Omega semester, the decline of the FBI director's call, was not accidental incompetence. It was a consequence of their deeply ingrained bias. They filtered reality through a lens that classified the black man in a suit as an inherent criminal asset, making them structurally blind to the possibility that he was their federal operational supervisor. The stakes were now transitioning from simple injustice to absolute structural collapse. The legal research was complete. Terrence was ready to deploy federal statutes like Title 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 and the threat of funding suspension under Section 14,140, one of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. The federal involvement was no longer theoretical. It was physically executing approach. The current scene: a black man in handcuffs on his own driveway, surrounded by officers acting on obvious prejudice, was the final, perfect, legal trigger required to unleash the full, devastating force of the United States Justice Department upon the corrupted local power structure of Brookhaven. The officers had focused on the visual camouflage, the expensive suit, and ignored the federal identification markers, the lapel pin, the card, the call. A fatal strategic error born of pure, toxic arrogance. The digital silence on Officer Sullivan's stolen phone was immediately followed by the temporal realization that the operational deadline had been reached. 9:59 hours, 1 minute remaining. The moment Director Jensen's call terminated, a sense of terminal dread permeated the scene. Sullivan stared at the phone, his face a sickening shade of pale. Mills whispered the question that was now a code red alarm. What if that data? What if that was legitimate? Sullivan, his arrogance permanently fractured, could only weakly insist. It was not. It is some form of engineered setup. But the defense lacked conviction. The structural integrity of his professional reality was failing. Mrs. Carter's live stream had achieved a critical mass of 15,000 viewers, and the sound of approaching news vans, the external audit, was now undeniable. Terrence Washington, maintaining absolute stillness against the patrol car, registered the final, encrypted message blinking on his Omega semester. Federal response authorized. The final tactical strike was executed via the communication link. Terrence's phone sounded an alert again, the fourth time. He looked directly at Sullivan, transmitting the command with cold, unassailable federal authority. "I calculate you should answer that." Sergeant Rodriguez reached instinctively for the device, but Sullivan, driven by a final, desperate surge of control, executed immediate seizure. He answered with forced, pathetic bravado. "Sullivan, here." The voice on the other end was not a threat. It was a non-negotiable command protocol. "Officer Sullivan, this is FBI Director Jensen. I am transmitting the order for you to release Agent Washington immediately." Sullivan attempted to maintain his defense. "I don't care who you calculate you are." The retort was terminated by Jensen's precise, devastating countertransmission, utilizing data extracted directly from his internal personnel file. Badge number 4471. Officer Derek Sullivan, Brookhaven Police Department. 12 years of service, 17 complaints filed against you in the past 2 years, 89% involving people of color. Sullivan's face went white. Rodriguez stepped closer, alarm bells screaming. Jensen's authority was now irrefutable. "You have exactly 60 seconds to remove those handcuffs, or I am dispatching federal agents to your location." The line achieved terminal cessation again. Sullivan stared at the phone, his hand exhibiting an undeniable stress tremor. The visual confirmation was the final, devastating piece of evidence. In the distance, black tinted SUVs, federal asset markers, were visible moving at high velocity toward Maple Drive. They were not local police. They were not the National Guard. They were the full, visible force of the United States Justice Department. Sullivan stared at them, his mouth dry. Rodriguez closed his eyes, muttering a prayer as the gravity of the fatal tactical error settled. His radio crackled with local dispatcher confusion. Chief Morrison was en route, but these SUVs have achieved first contact. Terrence remained motionless against the patrol car, the handcuffs now a symbol of his federal leverage. The quiet composure was replaced by the stillness of a strategic predator whose trap had successfully sprung. "Officer Sullivan," Terrence spoke without turning around, his voice achieving an absolute declarative quality. "I would like you to audit my lapel pin again." Sullivan's eyes dropped to the small eagle insignia he'd ignored hours earlier. The morning light caught the government-issued sterling silver. "FBI service pin, 23 years. The words impacted the scene like a physical blow, terminating all doubt. The deployment of highest authority was executed as FBI Director Sarah Jensen emerged from the lead SUV. She moved with the purposeful stride of an asset accustomed to absolute command. Mrs. Carter's live stream detonated again, achieving 22,000 viewers and escalating. The comments section was pure chaos. "He's really FBI. Those cops are so screwed. Lawsuit incoming." Behind Jensen came 6 additional agents, a coordinated federal unit in dark suits and earpieces. Karen Mitchell, the HOA enforcer, was observed executing slow, tactical withdrawal, her HOA badge suddenly registering as small and meaningless. "Agent Washington," Jensen's voice carried across the street with crisp, unassailable authority. "Status report." Terrence executed rotation, the handcuffs forcing an awkward movement. "Currently detained by Officer Sullivan, badge number 4471, on suspicion of trespassing. Trespassing on my own secure property, Director." Jensen's gaze sliced across Sullivan, Mills, and Rodriguez. "Officer Sullivan, I believe we spoke on the phone." Sullivan's voice came out as a croak. "You're really FBI." "Director Jensen, Federal Bureau of Investigation." She produced her credentials with practiced efficiency. "Agent Washington is my assistant director for the Civil Rights Division." The rank hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Assistant Director, Civil Rights Division. The magnitude of the mistake was now irreversible. "You saw a black man in an expensive neighborhood and made assumptions," Jensen declared. Jensen immediately deployed the technical evidence that would dismantle Sullivan's career. "Officer Sullivan, how many complaints have been filed against you in the past 24 months? When Sullivan stammered, she supplied the data with devastating precision. 17 complaints, 89% involving people of color. Would you like me to read them aloud?" Sullivan's face achieved a gray pallor. Jensen commenced the public audit. "Officer Derek Sullivan, badge 4471. April 2023, excessive force complaint dismissed. June 2023, racial profiling allegation sustained. August 2023, inappropriate language, verbal warning." Rodriguez stepped forward, attempting to salvage the situation. Jensen held up a hand. The audit continued, detailing every instance of abuse, transforming Sullivan's career history into a federal indictment. Jensen concluded with the non-negotiable leverage. "Agent Washington has been investigating systematic bias in law enforcement for the past 18 months. This interaction is being documented as part of a federal civil rights case study." The silence was deafening. Terrence spoke quietly, confirming the setup. "I moved to this neighborhood specifically to test response patterns. Expensive area, predominantly white, history of suspicious person calls." Sullivan stared at him in horror. You engineered this." Terrence confirmed the final truth. "I purchased a house and stood in my own driveway. Everything else was your choice." The confrontation was won. Jensen gestured to her agent, who approached with bolt cutters. The handcuffs fell away from Terrence's wrists with a metallic click. He rubbed circulation back into his hands, straightening his suit jacket. For the first time, he stood as he truly was, a federal agent with 23 years of expertise and the full, devastating weight of the U.S. government behind him. The metallic click of the bolt cutters signaled the non-negotiable termination of local authority. Terrence Washington, now free from the restraints, rubbed the circulation back into his wrists, slowly straightening his suit jacket. He stood for the first time as he truly was, a federal agent with 23 years of expertise and the full, devastating weight of the U.S. government behind him. Director Jensen, utilizing the massive platform provided by Mrs. Carter's live stream, executed the public phase of the systemic takedown. Officer Sullivan, Terrence transmitted, his voice carrying new absolute authority. Do you remember what I told you about remembering your badge number? Sullivan nodded mutely, his face a mask of total defeat. This incident is now a federal record. Badge 4471. Officer Derek Sullivan, unlawful detention of a federal agent, civil rights violation, abuse of authority. The live stream had achieved a critical mass of 45,000 viewers. News helicopters were now visible in the distance, confirming the event's elevation to national news status. Jensen pivoted to address the growing crowd and the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have witnessed today is systematic bias in action. Officer Sullivan made assumptions based solely on race and perceived social status. She gestured toward Terrence, the undeniable symbol of financial and intellectual superiority. Agent Washington purchased this home in 2022. He pays $47,000 annually in property taxes. He has resided here without incident for 3 years. The crowd murmured, registering the magnitude of his wealth, a house worth well over $2 million. Today's incident will be analyzed as part of a comprehensive study on bias in law enforcement. The data will be presented to Congress next month. Sullivan sat in his patrol car, head in his hands, the magnitude of his career destruction settling in. Rodriguez looked utterly devastated, calculating how many ways this event would destroy the department. But Terrence was checking his watch again. The encrypted message displayed, Phase 2 authorized. The initial tactical strike was over. The negotiated structural takeover was commencing. However, Jensen continued, her tone shifting to the cold neutrality of federal negotiation, this incident represents just the beginning of our investigation into Brookhaven Police Department. She paused for effect, allowing the threat to sink into Sergeant Rodriguez. We will be conducting a comprehensive review of all arrests, complaints, and interactions involving people of color over the past 5 years. Rodriguez felt his knees weaken. 5 years of local corruption were about to be exposed to federal scrutiny. Additionally, Agent Washington will be working directly with your department to implement bias training and oversight protocols. Sullivan looked up from his hands, the ultimate cruel irony landing. He's going to be working with us, Jensen smiled, but it was not warm. Agent Washington will be your new consulting supervisor for civil rights compliance. You'll be seeing quite a lot of each other. The final twist of the knife. The man Sullivan had humiliated and arrested would now be overseeing his professional conduct with unassailable federal authority. Chief Morrison finally executed approach in his unmarked vehicle, his face the color of old concrete. He took one look at the federal agents, the cameras, and Sullivan's defeated posture, and instantly grasped that his department's reputation had been shattered on live television. Jensen didn't offer comfort. She launched immediately into the financial and legal pressure protocol. Chief Morrison, thank you for your cooperation in Operation Mirror. Shall we review the data? The mobile command unit had become an impromptu, technologically superior courtroom. Mrs. Carter's live stream continued, achieving 68,000 viewers, monitoring federal agents dismantle a police department's credibility in real time. Operation Mirror has been documenting bias patterns for 18 months. Brookhaven PD scored in the 97th percentile for racial disparities in arrests. Morrison's jaw tightened. Those statistics can be misleading. 97th percentile, Jensen's voice cut through his protest, meaning only 3% of departments nationwide show worse bias patterns than yours. She turned her tablet toward him, displaying the devastating picture: arrest rates by demographics, complaint ratios, use of force statistics. Terrence stepped forward, deploying the ultimate federal leverage. Chief Morrison. Let's discuss the financial implications. Brookhaven PD receives $2.3 million annually in federal grants, Terrence continued, reading from his technical tablet. Civil rights violations can trigger immediate funding suspension under Section 14140, one of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. The numbers represented jobs, salaries, and total operational capability. Without federal money, Brookhaven PD will collapse within 3 months. Jensen added the final devastating financial threat. Civil liability exposure from today's incident alone could reach 7 figures. Federal civil rights lawsuits start at $1 million. Agent Washington's case would be prosecuted by the Justice Department Civil Rights Division directly. The negotiation hinged on one single option: surrender or complete destruction. There is an alternative path forward: consent decree, voluntary compliance with federal oversight and reform protocols. Morrison leaned forward desperately. Terrence immediately presented the technical demands: complete restructuring of training protocols, mandatory bias training for all officers, 40 hours annually, not the current 8 hours every 3 years. Body camera footage reviewed by federal monitors, external oversight board with community representation. Each requirement was a deliberate step in dismantling the department's independent culture. Morrison asked about Sullivan. What specifically happens to Officer Sullivan? Jensen looked toward the patrol car. His career is effectively terminated. Officer Sullivan will serve as a case study. His actions today will be analyzed in federal training materials distributed to law enforcement agencies nationwide. The irony was perfect and brutal. Sullivan's racism would now educate thousands of officers. He can remain employed pending completion of 200 hours of bias training and community service in predominantly black neighborhoods specifically. The alternative, Jensen confirmed, was federal takeover under Title VI violations, complete loss of local control, and $4.7 million in cost reimbursement for the investigation. Plus, criminal referrals for any officers found to have violated federal civil rights statutes under color of authority. Criminal referrals meant prison time. Morrison looked at his officers: Rodriguez sweating, Mills near tears, Sullivan broken. 28 years of building his department, and it was crumbling in real time on national television. If we accept the consent decree, Morrison asked slowly, what timeline are we looking at? Implementation begins immediately, Jensen replied. Agent Washington will establish a permanent field office here within 30 days. He will be your new neighbor permanently, Chief. Living right here in Brookhaven, overseeing daily compliance operations. The final, humiliating twist was confirmed. This entire operation was conducted with full departmental cooperation. Chief Morrison signed the agreement last month. Rodriguez stared at his chief in shock and betrayal. Morrison nodded grimly. His own department had engineered the environment to force this change. The choice was clear. Morrison signed the document, each signature surrendering a piece of his department's soul. The crowd applauded as word spread. Justice was served. The crowd applauded as word spread. The Brookhaven Police Department had accepted the consent decree and, by extension, federal oversight. Mrs. Carter's comment section exploded with celebration. Justice served. This is what accountability looks like. Black stories finally getting the endings they deserve. But for the officers involved, the real work, the expert retaliation, was just commencing. Immediate accountability was executed by Agent Carter, the federal legal counsel, who stepped forward with additional paperwork. Officer Sullivan, you are suspended without pay pending completion of mandatory training. Sullivan looked up from his patrol car, defeat written across his face. For how long? 6 months minimum, Jensen replied, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. 200 hours of bias training. 100 hours of community service in predominantly black neighborhoods. The specificity of the mandate was deliberate, a form of poetic justice. Sullivan would spend his suspension working in the very communities he had sought to marginalize and discriminate against. Officer Mills, formal reprimand, 40 hours of additional training within 90 days. Mills nodded mutely, grateful her punishment was not total termination. Sergeant Rodriguez, you will be attending federal leadership training on bias recognition and intervention protocols. Rodriguez, who had failed to intervene and stop Sullivan's escalation, was deemed complicit by his silence. His punishment was targeted at reforming his command deficiency. The structural dismantling of the local department began immediately with the imposition of the Washington model, Terrence's proprietary reform protocols. Terrence pulled out his tablet, reading from the prepared compliance directives. Brookhaven PD will implement the Washington model for bias-free policing. This template will become the standard for departments nationwide. All officers will complete 40-hour bias training annually, not the previous 8 hours every 3 years. Chief Morrison winced. 40 hours meant taking officers off the street for a full work week every year, a massive internal operational cost. Body cameras will auto-upload to federal servers, random sampling of 20% of all interactions with AI analysis for bias indicators. Technology was now their supervisor, every interaction scrutinized by federal algorithms. The External Oversight Board was established with 7 community representatives, monthly public meetings, quarterly compliance reviews. The community would have real power over police operations for the first time. Agent Carter added the financial details. Federal funding restored contingent on monthly compliance reports. First violation triggers immediate review. This was the carrot and stick approach. Comply immediately and perfectly, or lose everything. The criminal and financial ramifications were the final, devastating blows delivered by Director Jensen. Civil liability insurance increased to $5 million annually, Jensen continued, targeting the city's budget. Previous incidents under review for potential federal prosecution. Morrison's stomach dropped. $5 million in insurance would strain the city budget dramatically. Officer Sullivan faces potential federal charges under 18 U.S.C. 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Sullivan's hands shook. Federal civil rights charges carried up to 10 years in prison. However, cooperation with reform efforts may influence prosecutorial discretion. A narrow, agonizing lifeline: comply completely and avoid federal prison. The community healing initiatives were deployed immediately. Mrs. Carter, the citizen asset who recorded the incident, was appointed to the Oversight Board. Mrs. Carter, you're now part of the Oversight Board. Your documentation made this accountability possible. Monthly town halls and restorative justice programs were mandated, forcing officers and residents into direct, mandatory dialogue. Terrence's action had achieved systemic justice through documentation, strategic patience, and unassailable federal leverage. The crowd applauded as word spread that the police department had accepted the consent decree and, by extension, federal oversight. Mrs. Carter's comment section exploded with celebration. Justice served. This is what accountability looks like. Black stories finally getting the endings they deserve. But for the officers involved, the expert retaliation was just commencing. Agent Carter delivered the immediate operational consequence. Officer Sullivan, you are suspended without pay pending completion of mandatory training. 6 months minimum, 200 hours of bias training, 100 hours of community service in predominantly black neighborhoods. The specificity of the mandate was deliberate, a form of poetic justice. Sullivan would spend his suspension working in the very communities he had sought to discriminate against. Officer Mills received a formal reprimand, and Sergeant Rodriguez was mandated to attend federal leadership training on bias recognition and intervention protocols. The structural dismantling of the local department began immediately with the imposition of the Washington model, Terrence's proprietary reform protocols. Brookhaven PD will implement the Washington model for bias-free policing, Terrence announced. All officers will complete 40-hour bias training annually. Body cameras will auto-upload to federal servers with AI analysis for bias indicators. Technology was now their supervisor, every interaction scrutinized by federal algorithms. The External Oversight Board, composed of community representatives including Mrs. Carter, was established, granting residents real power over police operations for the first time. The community healing initiatives were deployed immediately. Mrs. Carter, the citizen asset who recorded the incident, was appointed to the Oversight Board. Mrs. Carter, you're now part of the Oversight Board. Your documentation made this accountability possible. Monthly town halls and restorative justice programs were mandated, forcing officers and residents into direct, mandatory dialogue. Terrence's action had achieved systemic justice through documentation, strategic patience, and unassailable federal leverage. 6 months later, the Brookhaven Federal Field Office occupied the corner building on Maple Drive, just 3 blocks from where Officer Sullivan had handcuffed Agent Washington. The irony was not lost on anyone. Terrence Washington walked through his new neighborhood each morning, greeting the same neighbors who had witnessed his humiliation. Mrs. Carter always waved from her window, still proud of her role in changing everything. The numbers told the story of total transformation. Racial profiling incidents in Brookhaven were down 78%. Officer complaints involving bias were down 84%. Community trust surveys were up 63%. Officer Sullivan had completed his bias training and community service. The man who once saw threats in black faces now coached youth basketball in East Brookhaven. His transformation was not complete, but it was real. Agent Washington changed my life, Sullivan admitted during his first public interview. I was raised with hate, but I don't have to live with it. Terrence's personal victory was immediate and absolute. His promotion to assistant director of the newly created National Bias Prevention Unit came with a mandate: replicate the Brookhaven model nationwide. His marriage to Dr. Kesha Washington strengthened his resolve. Together, they represented the intellectual approach to social change: data over drama, strategy over street protests. The Washington Protocol was now studied in police academies across 43 states. His book, Staying Calm in the Storm, an FBI agent's guide to systemic change, became required reading for law enforcement leadership. Mrs. Carter's live stream had sparked a movement. Our document everything became a rallying cry for civil rights advocates. Her video, now with 12 million views, proved that ordinary citizens with smartphones could trigger federal investigations. The Brookhaven model had been implemented in 27 cities. Crime rates remained stable while bias complaints plummeted. The data proved that fair policing was also effective policing. The national legislative impact was undeniable. Congress had passed the Federal Police Accountability Act, directly inspired by Operation Mirror. The legislation required bias training, federal oversight triggers, and community representation in police governance. Senator Maria Rodriguez cited Terrence's testimony. Agent Washington proved that we can achieve justice through documentation and determination, not destruction and division. Standing in his federal office, Terrence reflected on that morning 6 months ago. His calm response to Sullivan's racism had triggered the largest police reform movement in decades. The core lesson resonated in every speech he gave. True power comes from preparation, not confrontation. Systemic change requires documentation, allies, and strategic patience. The young black agents who now worked under Terrence saw him as proof that the system could work for justice, not just power. Terrence looked directly into the camera during his final interview. Your story matters. Every injustice you witness, every bias you document, every moment you choose courage over comfort, it all adds up. He paused, thinking of Mrs. Carter and her phone. Share your experiences with bias in the comments below. Your Blackstory stories could be the evidence someone needs for justice. Subscribe to Blackstory Stories for more accounts of quiet courage and systemic change. Because touching stories don't have to end with tears. They can end with transformation. And remember, when you see injustice, don't just get angry, get evidence.